Hello, Hibiscus. Welcome to the latest episode of Cosmic Chai. Look, before we get into it, you know I'm all about social justice and spirituality. And for every episode I make of Cosmic Chai, I go out my way to donate money to organizations that help and protect the people of Palestine. Unfortunately, the aid that is meant to be going to the Palestinians is being attacked by Israel. Not just being attacked, it's like being blocked, it's actively being like blown up. They are making sure the Palestinians are starved out, killed out, and it's just atrocious. They are literally war crimes. One of the things I was thinking is, look, if our money is not helping reach the Palestinians the way we would like to, then that means we can also withhold our money to make sure the people harming them can't keep attacking them at such a vicious rate. And one thing I've always taught when it comes to colonialism is a lot of people think colonialism is about God and glory. That is absolutely incorrect. Colonization is literally a financial venture to exploit communities who are rich in resources, knowledge, and so much more that the colonizers do not have. So the best way to dismantle colonization is literally to boycott and stop them getting their money and earning it through the systems and sources that they so used to. So I'm going to put a link here up on the screen. Please go and check it out. This is a wonderful community. They have taught me so much about boycotting. They've really made it easy to understand where I can best stop my money going and I can make a difference. And I would love for you to join me. Other than that, you know the routine. Go and grab a cup of jar, get real comfortable, and we are going to talk about, well, what happens when the colonizers stop cosplaying as us and where do we go from here? Obviously, make sure you like and subscribe because I know you look forward to our conversations. Okay, cool. Let's get into it. We 100% have to go through what inspired this episode firstly. Essentially, I made this like off the cuff internet prophecy ages ago, and this year I'm really watching it be fulfilled. So I was like, I can't be the only one noticing this, and I think it would be a very interesting conversation. So let's get into it, Hibiscuses. If any of you are new around here, I'm a Vedic astrologer, and I built a huge online community via TikTok. And one of the original phrases that garnered me a lot of attention and helped start conversations and build relationships with people online was a phrase called Starbucks spirituality. And all Starbucks spirituality encompasses is this kind of idea and concept of all kinds of people who abuse and misuse spirituality, either for financial gain, marketing, but all that kind of untoward stuff. And one thing I've always found fascinating is which demographics get offended by Starbucks spirituality. Because in all honesty, it really resonates, and a lot of marginalized people feel entertained by it because they have their own experiences and feelings and thoughts about spiritual practices being taken from their community, being culturally appropriated. So for them, it like lights them up. Now for the perpetrators, it's a sore spot, but I don't care. Like, good, I'm glad you feel offended, thief. But one of the things that was really interesting is Starbucks spirituality started really wonderful conversations online about people exploring their relationship with spirituality as a marginalized person. And you know, at this point, I've read for over 3,000 people. So that one little phrase has garnered me so much wisdom. And the thing was, and I will always be like so transparent about this, I have never cared about using, like, I don't care if people find Vedic astrology accurate or not, right? It has never been that. My aspiration, and hopefully it will always be like this, is to make sure that whenever marginalized people come across me, they feel a sense of fire and passion to go and rediscover their roots and refine that information and reclaim it. And then through that, obviously, I've done like a lot of entertaining videos being like, goodbye Starbucks spirituality, death to you all, like time is up. And I intentionally did that. Like, again, I'm a Vedic astrologer. We predicted in the coming years that the downfall of colonialism would begin. And the many societies would look very different as we get thicker into that kind of transit on humanity. So like, you know, I'm very like, I'm very intentional with my words, and that also gave me a lot of confidence because, again, I haven't talked about this a lot, but when we're young, we're given like these astrology books as children, right? And it's for the parents to understand, okay, why is this kid here? How can we help the kid grow? What will the kid feel like is its purpose? What's it going to gravitate to? What's the kid's downfall? Like, how can we make sure this soul has the best experience in their life? And one thing that was always really interesting about mine was it always emphasized that I would be like a religious teacher, I would be an astrologer. And growing up, I always struggled with that. And it's not because I don't have a passion and joy for these things. Like, quite frankly, you could lock me away for a year and just allow me to study different religions, come up with different ideas, and I love it. Like, I have never got bored of it. I feel like the knowledge comes very easily to me, but it didn't make me feel any less of a freak. So as I was kind of gaining my confidence online, kind of stepping into my purpose, and it's still a bit of a shaky journey at the moment because sometimes I turn around and I'm like, I cannot believe I'm doing this. There was like a growing feeling of me like, Rani, do not be ashamed. Like, this basically, it shows this is a huge part of your life purpose. In some regards, it's a bit of a birthright. What shame should you have? This is not weird. This is very much a part of your people, part of your culture, part of your spirituality. Embrace it. Like, God has given it to you for a reason. Anyway, so as I start growing into my confidence, colonizer free astrology comes up because as I'm learning from all these different people from many communities across the world, the thing that I pick up on is a lot of people don't trust their spiritual practices or feel ashamed or embarrassed about them due to colonialism. So then what happens is, not, I think some half intentionally and some half like God's plans, I end up creating like this huge bubble around me of like a community that's very like passionate about sharing their practices, learning from one another, and all that kind of jazz. But what happens in that process is it makes them hypercritical and almost ready to throw hands on Starbucks spirituality, because as we go through the process of reclaiming, relearning, and figuring out what that looks for us now, obviously it puts an immense amount of pressure on these individuals who cosplay and use our spiritual practices to make money, marketing purposes, the whole shebang. So what happened was, 2 years into kind of me building my community, I knew my time was coming or something was going to change, because there was this really distinct period in 2022, and it sticks in my head like really vividly, that there were these really huge like spiritual content creators who had like millions of followers. At that time, I would have barely had like 30,000, so I'm micro in comparison. And you couldn't make it up. All of a sudden, they were all saying, you know, Spirit told me Vedic astrology is like demonic. And then they would be like, it was just very direct and all of that. And I don't know if you've ever had it, but I knew they were speaking at me when they were saying it, because I'm like, no one else out here is as spicy about Vedic astrology and brings up conversations around social justice, around cultural appropriation, around racism and discrimination and sexism and casteism that we see in religion. So I know you're shook, but in my head, straight away, it was so weird. Usually when I see stuff like that, it would make me anxious, or I'd be like, I wouldn't feel good. Like that, as soon as they said it, I was like, oh, this is your downfall beginning, and within said amount of time, it's going to be over for you. And lo and behold, we're now in 2024, and what are the same creators saying? All of a sudden, because tides are changing, people don't have tolerance for that. People are refinding actually what their heritages have created and what they are. They no longer want to do spirituality. So what they're saying is, you know, I found God recently. And then they're going back to Abrahamic faiths. So specifically, a lot of them will be like, I'm a Christian now. And even that, I'm like, that's so weaponized, because that's not Christianity you're following. You're literally following a colonizer's remix version of Christianity to kind of keep you under, I don't know, under control, whatever that is. So when I was reflecting on it, I was like, okay, cool. One, yeah, my time is coming. The girls are shook, and thank God. But also, I was thinking, well, you had all those years where you've clearly cosplayed, you've took various spiritual practices to make money, to build fame, whatever, and now you're crumbling. And one thing I think it's made me think about is it makes me so uncomfortable that they can cosplay, put it down. In their head, they think they can walk away unscathed. There'll be spiritual ramifications, which we will definitely get into during this podcast. But I thought this is worth exploring because we can do like an astrology break right here and now. Saturn's going to go into a sign called Bhuva Bhadra. That's going to happen next week, right? And it's going to be with us for a couple of months. But overall, we're now getting into Saturn finishing, going through all 9 types of Aquarius. And what's so interesting is Bhuva Bhadra, it's Shakti. So Shakti just means, imagine a superpower a star sign is given to kind of complete its life purpose or its particular mission, is the power to spiritually uplift the sacrificer. And I don't know, originally when I thought the transit, I literally imagined like a lot of religious violence, all that kind of thing. But as we get closer and closer to it, I'm like, oh, you're talking about like a full 360 of all these marginalized people, all these disconnected, like fragmented communities and identities getting their hands back on that knowledge and using it to help them evolve, to feel confident and go forward with a lot of gusto, in which we know will be a huge time of like power struggles and conflict. And it reads like a Bollywood Shakespeare God-sent play. So let's unpack that now. One of the things I really want to unpack is why certain demographics feel so comfortable to cosplay as spiritual practitioners and why they seemingly have very little fear. Because to me, that is actually the most bewildering part. Because when you look at a bunch of different spiritual practices from all over the world, there are very clear rules that they all share. So the first one is initiation. You can't just pick these things up, and nor will you ever have access to said knowledge unless you go through certain people. And rightly so. It's powerful knowledge. It's mind-changing knowledge. It changes your whole being, your life. That's stuff that should be guarded, right? And I think if we look at that sentiment alone, I think it's very clear that it's the influence of colonialism, because colonialism is what? It birthed capitalism and consumerism. So for these people, I generally think the first thing is that they look at spirituality like a consumer product. They are not emotionally connected to this. It doesn't really mean anything to them, hence the exploitation of it, right? And I don't know if it's conscious or unconscious, but I think souls are always aware of the wealth that comes with spiritual knowledge, right? And I don't just mean money. I think there's always an energy of richness that surrounds spiritual knowledge. Hence, it stays with us somehow, some way, right? But then I also think if someone is a disturbed or off the track individual, they take that knowledge and misuse how that wealth could be created by that knowledge, if that makes sense, okay? But that's I've always found really weird. I'm like, why are you just acting like it's a consumer knowledge? There's ramifications. Which brings me to my second point. All these different spiritual practices and all the communities that they come from so explicitly say and warn and tell people, please do not start doing this stuff without a guru, or think you can take it, misuse it, and there won't be any repercussions. And I think when you look at that, right, my first point is it's clear that they don't believe in the stuff that they're doing, because if you fully believed, you would never misuse. Even myself. So one thing I've always found interesting is I talk a lot about Starbucks spirituality, right? But one thing I try to remind people is my first version of Starbucks spirituality came within inside my own community. I literally could not care about a demographic out in the West, because in my communities where I felt Starbucks spirituality first, right? And a lot of them were priests and mystics who would abuse spiritual knowledge to scare people, to make money. So I know it inside out and very well. And like one of the things I've always found so funny about my own astrological charts, one of my Saturn placements literally denotes she's here to oppose false gurus. And the older I get, I'm like, oh, it makes sense. I'm sure you didn't imagine in this form, but I'm happy to help, God. Like, tell me where you're at. I'll become like my own shade room of spirituality. No, I'm joking, it's not shady, but like I get it. But when you look at that, right, and there's a reason they tell you please don't misuse it. It's not even out of like a turf thing about like this is our stuff, back up. It's very much considering your well-being and your welfare. And I have seen it so much in the last year. So going back to this idea of I had like this online prophecy where I was like, yeah, Starbucks spirituality are gonna start like dropping like flies and it's gonna be hellish. And even at the beginning of this year, I remember I made this TikTok video and I don't know what came over me, but I was literally like, please, if you are someone who is misusing spiritual practices in any shape or form, stop that. Because as we get deeper into 2024, there will be huge ramifications. And ever since I said that, I noticed another thing. So while Starbucks spirituality is all of a sudden claiming they found like the colonizer's God and they're going to forms of the Abrahamic religion, which are not even authentic, it's very much like a white man's take on Abrahamic faiths. The ones who haven't gone that way, all of a sudden now they're cosplaying as like Vedic astrologers or saying, this is the thing that makes me so mad, and I'll do a different episode on this completely. No, I do not care if you learn from some Indian man in India about my spiritual practice. What did I just say? The original version of Starbucks spirituality came from inside of my community. I'm acutely aware of how those people will exploit dummies like you and enable you. But that comes down to like the dynamics of racism, colorism, like all of it. There's so much to unpack there. But no, I don't take you seriously because you got a certificate from India. No, I don't take you seriously because you obeyed a man that also probably in India is known as like a predator or something. You both are one and the same. You deserve each other. Get out my face. No, I don't take you seriously, right? But I lost my point. I was feeling hella spicy. Oh, that was it. So now that they're trying to, I don't know, beat the colonized allegations or whatever I've created. So now they're like, but no, I believe in all your stuff, so like, I'll do it. And I'm like, again, no problem if you want to learn. I encourage that. But there's a very like clear boundary that you don't all of a sudden start saying you're an astrologer. You don't all of a sudden wake up and say you're a practitioner. And one thing I found so funny, so going back to that idea that you don't touch this stuff because it will mess you up unless it is your life purpose or God has willed it. And you've just gone through the process that culture has for their spiritual practices. They all go do lally. I've seen it so well. Like, I literally have seen so many times, and this is just this year alone, of these people who like, I know about Vedic astrology, let me teach you all of this lot, and the intention and everything is wrong. Over time, online, they are literally visibly mentally becoming more and more unwell. Not to make light of it, but some of them will actively be like, I want to unalive myself. And this is after what, 3, 4, 5 months of being like, I'm a Vedic astrologer. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, to us, these deities that you think are just pretty little statues are very active energies. And when you misuse their energy for ill stuff, oh, they're gonna deal with you, right? And the other thing I see is if they're not getting to that level of craziness, in terms of like, I want to unalive myself and really dark stuff, and they're saying it online so publicly, the next thing will be like, all their stuff starts messing up. So like, I have seen plenty of examples where people have started posing as Vedic astrologers and like their lives start crumbling. Like all of a sudden their relationships break down, they're having arguments with people in the comment section, but like there's a very distinct vibe of something is not right here and you are being antagonized. And I'm like, this is not an ascension process. Like, all you freaks think ascending is like God will challenge you in A, B, and C. I'm like, it doesn't. God is merciful and kind. I don't know what you're used to, but whatever's happening to you isn't God. I think it's a retaliation. I think you've annoyed whatever deities we look after and we worship, but it's not God, baby. It's not God. So even when I look at those two things, I'm like, wow, you can cosplay so easily because one, you don't really believe in it. Two, a lot of the issues lay with the ramifications of colonization, where you fundamentally believe spirituality is a consumer product, and just the way your ancestors pillaged and took and thought they could do what they want and hung up very spiritual texts and items in their houses, like fine art pieces, you are one of the same. You just do it online. You're a Wi-Fi version of your ancestors, to be honest. It's always kind of bewildered me. And then after it's all said and done, because I was about to say trust, you will be dealt with. But I think we can all agree we are seeing in real time these people spiraling or stepping away from the practices. And even when they step away, I kind of think God has interfered one way or another, because I'm like, why now would you step away? Is it the political pressure and people's norms changing where like we are becoming much more vocal about cultural appropriation, skewed dynamics, addressing discrimination in various religious forms and so forth? Or, and deep down I feel this, is it like God wearing you down, and like do you get signs of like put this just down because your stuff is not going to run anymore? But even then I think it all serves a purpose, because one thing I think about a lot as we go deeper into when Saturn hits all 9 types of Pisces, that's when I'm really thinking like it's going to be so spicy. I don't think we're ready for that level of oomph that we're all going to get, right? But maybe you served a purpose that like different marginalized people had to see it get this bad, this ugly, this abuse. So something in their soul gets irritated and they're like, no, I cannot watch you do this. Because a lot of the Vedic astrologers that I look up to, most of them have similar experiences to I, where they were literally so annoyed going to different practitioners within our community who've been enabled by discrimination to do what they do. And they would just constantly tell people very untoward stuff. And we're like, this is not God. Like, how's it got like this? So then for whatever karmas, whatever destiny they had, after they mentally reach that point, it's so funny how God starts entering their life and giving them the knowledge, giving them the people, giving them the guru, giving them the people to even sit down and start breaking bread with. You know, we have a gift. We're there to serve. It's not, I always emphasize this. And I think this is the difference between when you can cosplay as a spiritual practitioner versus when you are one, right? At all times, I am aware there's nothing special or unique about me. It literally, I am just a little messenger. It just happens to be after doing worship, sadhana, and connecting with my spirituality. If you come to me and you give me your date of birth, time of birth, and location of birth, some images will appear. I can read those images pretty well. And that's an element of destiny that me and you were meant to sit down. I'm meant to tell you with a pure heart everything I see. And in that moment of time, you were meant to hear those messages. However, if I ever lost my mind and started thinking like I am this like all-knowing, all-being person, the same things would happen. One, all my predictions would start coming incorrect. Secondly, a madness and a badness would come to me. But thirdly, and I think again it links back to this idea that when you cosplay as spiritual practitioners, like you don't believe in it, so you think there's no ramifications. And one of the things I think is really beautiful is when you see these spiritual practices as gifts from God, it's not that you fear God, but you know you're answering to something. So if you knew and you believed you are answering to someone who is higher above you, can control every reality around you, it's going to make you behave and move in a certain way, hopefully. Obviously, I can't talk for everybody. But yeah, like when I looked at all of it, I was like, this is actually insane. Like, you can get away with cosplaying as spiritual practitioners and you have no fear. And even when spooky stuff starts happening to you and you actively are losing your mind and things are going wrong, you still don't stop. But I always think also, everything is happening as God wills it. So these people, for better or worse, they serve a purpose. And maybe that was their karma. Maybe they too actually were given an option that you don't have to do this. You could do it like this, you could be A, B, and C. They could have done it in so many different ways. You could have started conversations with communities and likewise been an advocate to be like, hey, I found this. This is their community. Hey, from community, why don't you tell the people who you are and use your platform in a positive way? But you chose not to. And every action, every deed is noticed and engaged with, and that's yours. But, you know, as we get past them leaving and they stop cosplaying, I think it has huge ramifications for marginalized people. And that's what I wanted to concentrate on next, actually. So there is a very clear pattern that when these cosplayers leave our spiritual practices alone, they all go back to say they found God, and it's usually through the medium of an Abrahamic religion. And there's a key point in rhetoric that I find deeply hurtful, is when all of a sudden they start demonizing the same spiritual practices that made them money. And I think that's very interesting, right? Because it wasn't demonic when it was making you money, and it wasn't demonic when it gave you power and influence over people. But it's demonic when what? You start to lose your mind because it was stuff that you shouldn't have touched. It was demonic when it could no longer make you wealth. It was demonic when you had to come face to face with the marginalized people that you are exploiting and taking opportunities and recognition and power away from. Now it's demonic. I think you should sit with that. I think you should sip your jar and burn your tongue, you dirty, low down, unmoisturized dogs. But I digress. I think for us as marginalized people, and I think this also explains why for many years I felt really uncomfortable sharing outside of my community that I was a Vedic astrologer and that, yeah, like I can do certain things and A, B, and C, is because the whole time, on a more, I think, mainstream level, when you think of spiritual practitioners, you think of these freaks. And they have misused it, exploited it in such a way that I'm like, I am not like these people. I don't share their beliefs, nor do I behave like them. And it's so hard. And this is the issue, right? When you all of a sudden get representation for practices that you didn't create, when you become the face, you can completely change and really impact our reputation. And it's, you know what, I think about this a lot because it really hits deep with me, is when you look back at the British Empire in India, one of the key pieces of narrative and the reason India didn't gain independence for a really long time is the British would literally paint all different South Asians who belong to that part of land before partition as savages. They would literally talk about us like we were rats, we were savages, we were like crazed people who were like running around in fire and no clothes. And like, even as I sit here and say it, like it makes my blood boil. And when I reflect on the fact that you, as someone who cosplayed with our spiritual practices, you put on these costumes, you played into persona, and you made money with it, you can up and leave because you won't be the person who will have to deal with the discrimination online. Because that's the thing, right? You can cosplay as a different culture and take that costume off and go back to your, well, for the sake of this, to your whiteness, right? To whatever privilege you belong to. We don't get afforded that. Do you know how many comments I had to delete on TikTok when I first started of like the most disgusting, racially coded, like religious hate stuff from your demographics? And I knew in my heart of heart, the only reason they perceived me like that is because they're used to people like you. And that's the key thing, right? You can walk away, but we will sit with the ramifications of what you have created. And it's not, the thing is, they always lack authenticity. It's never you want to take these spiritual practices and do something good, because in the same breath, you cannot gatekeep God. God will find people however he sees fit. That's part of their destiny, right? And I see in astrology all the time, there's so many birth charts that I've read where it shows the person will find a different religion to the one that they were birthed in, and that will bring them a lot of joy and peace, and that's their specific journey. You effers are not that. You very intentionally know what you're doing and you have very little regard. And even me now, I'm very conscious of how I show up online because I want to give an accurate and honest representation that, hey, you can be a spiritual person, but this stuff is not a wooga wooga. This stuff is not gothic and vampire and satanic. Like, this is a part of our everyday. Like, this is literally spiritual cleanliness for us. This is not weird or absurd. This is God. This is God in motion. But you have ruined that. And that's something that's really heavy to sit with. And I think it makes it tougher when they don't think about their behavior and how it impacts us. You just look insane. Or you are insane, but you look mad, extra, nasty insane. It's giving Willy Wonka, who kidnapped like 100 small people. And why does no one ever think that's weird? And I think following on from that, it's clear that you can drop this thing because it's not a part of your identity. Whereas for a lot of marginalized people, our religions are hugely a part of our identity. And that's one of the ramifications of colonialization. Like, realistically, in a healthy society, you should not look at anyone and assume they belong to a certain religion. However, because we have all been affected by the colonial gaze and what colonizers create in terms of caricatures of religions and people, for instance, right, I know if I dress modestly and I wore minimal makeup and I had no nail polish on my hand, and perhaps I even decided to cover my head, no one's going to assume I'm Hindu or Sikh. They're straight away going to be like, she's Muslim. I'll give you another example. I could then dress up, let's say, I don't know, when you think of like a good Christian girl, what do you reckon that looks like, right? I could dress up like that. Do you think anyone's going to look at me and say she's Christian? No. They're like, are you Indian? Are you Hindu? Are you like, this is what I mean. So much of our faith is interbled into our identity, and we can never walk away from that. And sometimes we have to deal with identities that are not even ours, because the ramifications of colonization is many people have been trained and kind of brainwashed and seeing through their lens. And that's something I always emphasize to people, that like, when you talk about cultural appropriation, it's not just a case of like, it's a trivial thing. There's real life complications to the stuff that you do. You contribute actively to the brown girls who get bullied in high schools. You contribute to a colleague in your organization that maybe doesn't feel comfortable to go to the prayer room or take time off to do what they need, or even openly share their spiritual beliefs. And why? Not because they've ever had control over the representation and the conversation and education around their religions. Because of you, dumbass. Because you are the mainstream. You are the majority. And as of yet, you all keep failing us when it comes to representation. You keep... The thing is, they'll all scream, why can't we all be one? Or like, it's a free-for-all and we should all be connected. No, we actually can't be connected until you allow us to have spaces where we can exist without being ashamed of our identities or fearing retaliation. Until we get to that point, no, it's not appropriate to say we're one of the same, because we're not. And you, your ancestors, have all contributed towards that. And that's what I mean. For me, like, as this podcast grows and I get time and space to think about my feelings and stuff like that, one of the conclusions I've been coming to for a long time is I don't think spirituality and politics and everything that comes under politics in terms of discrimination, racism, and all of that are separate. They're one and the same, because your spiritual beliefs will shape your moral compass, right? Also, sorry about that. But not just your spiritual beliefs shape your moral compass, it shapes your politics. And I think questions have to be asked that if we're spiritual and we're meant to be these nice people, how come our politics is so ugly? What is influencing or interfering with that? And also, yeah, religion is political, because since whenever people have used religion to manipulate and harm others. So you can't separate them at this point. You have to basically address the discrimination, the hate, the colonization that has happened through the medium of religion. And once we address that, then we'll have good politics. But until we get to that point, it's just like a constant circle of hate and discrimination. Like, it won't go away. Like, oppression will be upheld. And I think when you talk about this perpetual cycle of hate, discrimination, and basically the stuff that marginalized people have to suffer through because people decide to interfere with their spiritual practices, cosplay as them, demonize them, I feel like it all has its purpose, right? Because again, in Hinduism, we believe in the 4 stages of man, and it's an ever-repeating cycle. Like, as long as you are human, you will fall into one of the cycles. That is the nature of man. It is a soul, it's how it's developed. But the 4th stage is always known as Kali Yoga, right? The worst of the worst. And earlier this year, I did a TikTok where I was like revisiting this idea of Kali Yoga. So Kali Yoga is a little bit similar to the Abrahamic faith when you talk about the end days, right? It's this idea of like spirituality no longer influences people. There is such a destructive mindset. Dharma, so like moral duty, responsibility, is on the floor. Like, things are all intensively just nasty as hell. But then there is a resurgence, right? Something breaks this destructive mindset. And recently, I cannot help but think, because like, the thing is, when you have religious texts, I kind of think we will never truly understand the depth of them, because I think they're meant to inspire us. So when certain times come, we behave in a certain way that we could oppose the evil things, if that makes sense. But the more I've been looking into it, sometimes I wonder, when they talk about Kali Yoga is ruled by a destructive or devilish or like morally bankrupt mindset, I think they're talking about colonialism. So I can't help but think, when we are seeing so many religions go through their own internal issues of addressing and removing people who've exploited religion to harm people inside of that community and to damage under the guise of religion, when we are seeing more conversations grow about it's not appropriate for people to take practices from communities that they don't belong to, maybe this is always how it's meant to go, because the destructive mindset is colonialism, and maybe this is how we overcome it. You know, because I made a note, right? When you look at all world religions, there's three archetypes that always come up. There's the messenger, the healer, the warrior. So in terms of the messenger, that's your occult practitioners, right? The divine vessel, someone who would deliver a message from God and help people, guide people, inspire people in their greatest moments of pain, be able to explain why they're going through something. Then you have the healer, right? And the healer can come in many different forms, but that is someone who's there to protect the community, rehabilitate them, give them longevity, right? Keep them inspired. And then finally, you have the warrior, right? And the warrior is a much more visceral leadership role for that community to get them through, to inspire them. But one thing they all don't have is the teacher. No person can ever be the teacher. God is the teacher. You want to learn, you want that education, you literally build a relationship with God. That knowledge doesn't come to you unless you engage and commune with God. And I just think, again, when I look at everything, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm absolutely livid at what you have done. Because the thing is, you had all this time online to start good conversations. There have been many human rights violations. There has been so many atrocities, inequalities, and not once did you address them. One of my biggest beefs with Starbucks spirituality is I find it so interesting how every day you can wake up and say, I have a message from your twin flame, this is going to happen to your career, but you have no messages on Palestine. You have no messages on the welfare of people. You have no messages in regards to in the safety of people. I think it's really interesting the messages your God delivers you versus the one that mine delivers me. And that is so telling. Like, if you're for the people and you're by God, you would care a lot when people are being harmed. You wouldn't care about the money. You would, like, it's all of that kind of jazz. But then I just think, again, you're cosplaying. It doesn't mean anything to you. And also, a part of me wonders the karmas you'll carry. So I don't think I've ever spoke about this online, but one thing that's kept me on the straight and narrow, not that I'm that way inclined in the first place, is we have this kind of understanding when we sit with people and we do your astrology, right? We are building and burning karmas. We have to speak to you in such a way that it is helpful and it's kind and it's not, it is of service, essentially, right? All kind of the messenger kind of archetype I went through, you are to be of service. You never forget that. And the second you abuse that, you're going to pay for that in the long run, right? Whether it's in this life or the next life. And I just think that's funny because I'm like, oh, you have no fear? Like, I don't think God is a scary person, but I think like the fact that we have all seen God hold people to accountability should be enough for people to be like, I'm going to try and act right and I'm going to be really sorry if I get it wrong. But not this is the issue. You think you're above God. You literally, this conversation could go so much deeper and darker, but yeah, you get the idea that they can cosplay because it doesn't mean anything to them. They can then walk away because they are not the people who will have to deal with the ramifications of people misunderstanding spiritual practices, cultures, heritages, and all of that. And ultimately, they can then go back to a colonial system that will protect them, that idolizes them, and makes them the key focus. And I think that's really interesting. And if it was up to me, I don't believe in Hindu curses, but y'all inspire me to sit down and meditate for a very long time on your downfall. I don't even have to, it's here, we're singing in real time. Anyways, we're obviously moving into a time now where Starbucks spirituality is becoming more uncomfortable, less attracted to, and it simply is not beneficial for them to keep cosplaying as us. So where does that leave us now? And I think, in all honesty, it's quite clear. We are now in a position where our communities and our practices and our cultures are deeply misunderstood, right? And one of the other things that comes with them cosplaying as us, there is so much misguidance, ill information around what our practices actually mean and how they should be used, right? And unfortunately, a lot of them don't work for us anymore because of all the ramifications and the mix up and, I don't know, like the dark influence of colonization on our cultures. We now have a time to not only just reconnect and reclaim, but learn, understand, evolve. And I think what's really important is, as you kind of get into that journey, it's going to require us to unlearn shame. It's going to challenge the way we look at things. Because again, we're all, and this is not a shade, like even I'm guilty of this, we are so influenced by colonial norms that anything that is outside of it naturally doesn't seem great to us. It could feel scary, it could feel weird, it can feel all of that. That takes time to work through. You actively see me do it on TikTok as I pick, like, why do I like this? Why do I not like that? It will be the same for you. But we are beginning this moment in time for a reason. And my thing is, don't waste it. Because if astrologically, we and many other communities have got it right where we think the downfall of colonialism is now beginning, we're going to have to step up. Like the roles I mentioned, you have the healer, you have the messenger, you have the warrior. They serve their purposes. And you're going to have to kind of go towards those archetypes, but you're going to have to make it your own. And that's your personal journey. So yeah, that's all I had to say. I now need like a strong upper jar. I feel very heated after doing this episode. But optimistic. Heated but optimistic. That'd be the name of my biography. Heated but optimistic. Bye, hibiscuses.